Hi, my name's Rich Boren. I'm the owner of Cruiser Services, and on today's Schenker Watermaker Tech class, we're going to cover something, although basic, it's very important for good Watermaker maintenance, and that's the subject of seawater prefiltration. Because this issue, if not paid attention to, is going to cause you Watermaker problems down the road. It's almost a guarantee. So first of all water makers have pre-filtration requirements for the seawater. You need to remove the plankton, the algae, the bits of solid suspended dirt grime that makes the water turbid or green or a little bit brownish, depending on your local area. So that needs to be filtered out of the water stream before it gets into the RO membrane. So there's two primary filtering mechanisms upstream of your RO membrane. So first of all, there's the raw water strainer. So you have your through hole, followed by the next in line as part of the Watermaker system is your raw water strainer. That's part of your seawater prefiltration. That's going to move the big chunks, the eelgrass, the big pieces of something. Of course, it's a great place for little fish and octopus to live, which I've seen inside raw water strainers. So it has a mesh filter of about 100 mesh. It's a little stainless filter that you need to keep clean. I would recommend putting eyes on that frequently. If it looks nasty, it's time to clean it out. If it's packed and filled up, it's definitely time to clean it out. But the cleaner you keep that raw water strainer, the less starving of your feed pump you're going to have. So that's the first means of filtration, the raw water strainer. You then move into your feed pump. Exiting the feed pump, you go into your filtration, your finer filtration. And on Schenker Watermakers, that is a 5 micron pre-filter. So that's removing anything 5 microns and larger from going into the RO membrane. There's no need to pre-filter less than 5 micron in size because those particles are not going to get stuck in the RO membrane. They're just going to pass through the membrane and out with the brine discharge. Now, one thing pre-filtering does not do and does not have a role in is your ppm, your product water parts per million quality. That magic is done in the RO membrane. The pre-filters are simply removing the solid bits that if you don't remove them, if you run a Watermaker without a pre-filter in place, those larger chunks, of course, they can damage your high pressure pump, but they'll also plug up the RO membrane. So you always want to use a minimum of a 5 micron pre-filter inside your pre-filter canister. Now, you'll notice some Watermakers have progressive filtration, meaning they'll have a 50 micron, a 20 micron, something instead 2 or 3 filter canisters in front of the 5 micron. 5 micron is the requirement from an RO membrane functionality standpoint. If you have pre-filters in front of the 5 micron, they will load up with larger particles, and then the 5 micron will be your secondary filtration. There's different schools of thoughts on this, and here's why the Schenker Watermakers have a single 5 micron. You can have a 20 and a 5 in place and change out a 20 and a 5, let's say once a month. Okay, so now you have 2 filters to carry. Instead of carrying 6 filters for a year cruise, now you have 6 and 6. You have 12 filters to carry. Or you can have a single filter that maybe you need to change it more often. Maybe instead of every 2 months, maybe you need to change it every month, month and a half. But the thinking is it's still giving you adequate filtration and you have less filter elements to carry. Now, where that argument and logic train may not work well is if you're in areas of crazy high krill and plankton bloom area like Alaska, sometimes up in the Pacific Northwest. Sometimes you can benefit by having dual filtration, and you can simply add a 20 micron pre-filter in front of the 5, because if your pre-filter's plugging up in an hour run, okay, the reality is that's probably not the best water to be making water in from a Watermaker perspective. But if that's where you are and that's where you need to make water, you'll want to add an additional pre-filter in front of the standard 5 micron filter. Now, what type of filter should you use? There's lots of filters out there on the market. The best pre-filter to use is a pleated polyester material 5 micron pre-filter. It has greater surface area than a solid blown or a string wound pre-filter. The solid and the string, those work by embedding the particles into the filter element itself. So they're non-washable. So they're kind of a one and done pre-filter. So they're a little bit less money to purchase, but a pleated pre-filter, you can give it a wash. You know, pull it out every 30 days, give it a wash, rinse off the solids that are on it, let it dry on the lifeline, and then put it back in the system. I usually have 2 filters in rotation. One of them is in the Watermaker. The second one I pulled out of the Watermaker, cleaned it, freshwater flush, rinsed it, let it dry on the lifeline, then I threw it in a locker. And I can get maybe 2, maybe even 3 rotations out of that pre-filter before I have to throw it away and put a new one in. Now, it's a $10 pre-filter, so I'm not necessarily trying to save the money because pre-filtration is critically important on a Watermaker, but sometimes you just can't carry enough pre-filters if you're going to be away from civilization for a while. So in that case, being able to rinse off and wash your pre-filters is a handy thing to have. So on Schenker Watermakers, they use a 2.5 inch in diameter by 10 inch filter. So it's called a 2.5 by 10 inch filter element. Now, this is confusing and it's industry wide, and why this is the case, I don't know. But a 10 inch pre-filter is often 9 7/8 inches tall. So sometimes you'll be online, you'll go to a dealer and say, hey, I need a 10 inch pre-filter. Well, I have 9 inches and 7/8. Okay, well, that's essentially the same thing. So be aware of that. Now, the type of pre-filters you don't want to use is paper. They make the very cheap paper filters. Those will break down in the seawater and can actually send pieces of that paper material downstream into the Watermaker. So stick with polyester style material filter elements. Those are better quality. You'll have much better results with those. Now, Schenker uses 2 different filter sizes. If you have a Zen 30 Watermaker, that uses a 2.5 inch by 5 inch pre-filter. It's still an off-the-shelf pre-filter. They're just not as common as the 10 inch pre-filter. So just be aware of that when you're stocking up on your pre-filters. There's a couple myths about pre-filters, and I don't know where this got started. Maybe it just sounds fun, so that's where this gets going out there as a dock rumor. There's this saying out there that I'll pull your pre-filter out, tie it to a rope, throw it behind your boat and drag it, and that'll clean it. Well, it's also a very good biofilm oil scum boom to collect any of that nasty stuff that's floating on the water. So don't drag your pre-filters behind your boat to clean them. You're beating them up. You're breaking down the filter element material, and you're skimming the top of the water as an oil boom, scum boom, picking up any of that nasty stuff that may be behind your boat. So if you're going to clean a pre-filter, slosh it around in a bucket of seawater and then give it a freshwater rinse and hang it on the lifeline to dry. The UV light will help kill things in the pre-filter. And don't use any bleaches or chlorines. Any cleaners that you put on your pre-filter element to clean it have a direct path into the Watermaker. So I recommend a seawater slosh around in a bucket, a freshwater rinse, dry them on the lifeline, and that's the best way to clean your filter elements if you need to clean them. Of course, you know, it's an expensive Watermaker, an expensive high pressure pump. A cheap $10 pre-filter, or even cheaper if you buy them by the case, you know, you need to have good maintenance with that inlet water stream. Pre-filtering is very important. I've been to a boat on a troubleshooting call where I pulled out the pre-filter and it literally had holes in it. I don't know how many years it had been used, but it literally had holes in it from use and cleaning that was passing particles right through it. So I'm a cruiser myself. I understand the cruiser desire to save a few bucks, but do yourself a favor, always have a fresh, in good condition pre-filter inside your Watermaker so that you don't cause yourself a bunch of drama. So a common question I get is also, how long will the pre-filters last? How frequent, how many gallons of production water or hours of Watermaker runtime can I expect to get out of a pre-filter? Well, that's highly variable because it all depends on the water source you're operating in. If you're in a murky bay where you can't see the bottom in 15 feet of water, that pre-filter is not going to last as long as crystal clear water where you're counting your anchor chain links 30 feet down below. It's so clear. So pre-filters can last anywhere from a week to hours in extreme cases to several months. In general, I tell people to expect to clean or replace your pre-filter every 30 to 60 days, just as a good average. If you can get a little bit longer than that, great. If it's an extremely dirty water source, then you may end up going through them a little bit quicker. Something to be aware of and always check when you're doing a filter change, and I've seen this costly mistake done several times. You unscrew the filter bowl, you pull the filter element out. If you just plop a new one in and re-screw it in, all of the particles that were on the outside of that filter element can fall into the bottom of the bowl, go into the internal side. So when you put in a new pre-filter, because pre-filters work outside to inside. Well, if that particles fall and get into the bottom of your filter bowl, so that when you put the new pre-filter element in that filter container, those solids can get into the inside of that pre-filter. Now they have a direct path into your Watermaker. Energy recovery Watermakers do not like solid bits going into them. Well, piston pumps don't as well. But they can scratch up the inside of your energy recovery pump and really wreak havoc on your system, even requiring a pump rebuild. So always pay attention. When you change pre-filters, clean out that filter bowl and don't lose your O-ring. So often people take their pre-filter bowl out, dump it overboard, boom, there goes their O-ring. They jump in to try to chase it. Sometimes they get it, sometimes they can't. So secure that O-ring, clean out that filter bowl as part of your filter change. Now, one indication that you need a pre-filter change is if your product water production is decreasing or your system pressure alarm is going off. Because remember, the pressure alarm is on the exit of your feed pump on the Schenker Watermakers. So if your pre-filter is clogged, the pressure leaving your feed pump going into the Watermaker is going to be measured. So if your alarm is tripping off immediately due to giving you a high pressure alarm, it's probably an indication the first thing to check should be your pre-filter. But always keep that clean. It's amazing. I met a couple cruisers who hey, my unit's running great. I'm 3 years in and I've never changed a pre-filter. Of course, when they open it up, it's jet black and definitely in need of a change. So keep an eye on it. And if your flow rate is decreasing, remember a Schenker Watermaker has a 10% recovery rate. So 10% of the seawater that flows through the Watermaker is becoming drinking water. 90% goes overboard. So if your pre-filter is plugged up to the extent it's slowing down the flow through it, you can actually decrease your product water. So when people give me a symptom of low flow, low production rate, one of the first questions I ask is, are you sure that your pre-filter is clean? Have you replaced it frequently enough? Let's replace it and see if that's the problem. All right, well, pre-filtering is a pretty simple concept, but it's very important for a properly functioning Watermaker to protect it from the solids and to keep your RO membrane from being plugged up. So always keep a fresh pre-filter in there before you head out for the season. Make sure you have enough of those to last. They're inexpensive. Of course, any Schenker dealer will carry them. It's also something Schenker uses off-the-shelf size pre-filters, so you can get them online, get them about anywhere. But don't underestimate the importance of a clean, functioning pre-filter on your Watermaker. Well, that's it for this topic. I'm glad to answer any Watermaker questions, make a video about it if you would like to get some more details about a topic you've been wondering about. I'm always reachable by email at rich@cruiserservices.com. Everyone have a great day and enjoy your Watermaker.